you're not familiar with an urban growth plan, all municipalities in the state of Tennessee in 1998, now if I'm wrong on any of this, John, correct me, you don't embarrass me, just correct me because I don't want to be wrong.
Okay.
In 1998, there was legislation and all municipalities had to come up with urban growth plans, and it had to be approved through the county commission or county court. Once that was done, and what John here today is Jon Hartman from the city planning municipality here, and also Johnson City does come into Carter County through their urban growth plan. And I have that on a thumb drive. I can show it to you later, or you can go on their website, Johnson City, and see their urban growth plan. But Jon Hartman here, he is the Elizabethton Planning and Development Director. He's going to talk to us about the Elizabethton Urban Growth Plan. Now remember, urban growth plans are by law, and he's going to show you the potential growth for Elizabethton City. And it is already passed county court. Therefore, they can annex in these areas he's going to be talking about. Now, I hope everyone, if you have a question, and I hope there are questions because you need to understand this. Like I say, where I came from, this was a major issue with Kingsport, Bristol, Johnson City. They were all growing in that area. If you read the papers lately, Johnson City is growing into Piney Flats over in Sullivan County. See, it does not have to be within the same county. You can go across county lines. But I think Elizabeth has blocked some of that from Johnson City by doing what they call corridor annexation down the Milligan Highway, that direction. Am I correct? Okay? Okay. So they have blocked some of that coming this way from Johnson City. But as you look at this and we start to plan, just think about where they can go, how many students are there, and how it's going to affect the school system, both the city schools and the county schools. It's very important. Mr. Birchfield, would you just kind of fill in for Rita Bull and be at the table? Would you do that?
Won't be able to stay very long.
Well, just stay as long as you can. And that way you might be able to brief her a little bit, because I love to have a representative from the city because it's part of it. You know what I mean? We're all working together here. The city is in the county, therefore we're all working together. And if we borrow $70 million, we'll have to borrow $100.5 million, because $30.5 million will go to the city. That's their percentage. And they are city taxpayers. And I've got some information I could give you if we had to get it. I got it from Ingrid to tell us what the payback would be and all that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of things we can discuss today. But the biggest thing I want to discuss is I'm going to turn it over to John. And I want him to explain the urban growth. And then, if you got questions, let's do it in an orderly manner and ask him some questions, okay? John, appreciate you coming.
No problem.
Turn it over to you.
I'd like to thank you all for inviting me today. This is an opportunity I don't get to take very often to kind of talk about Elizabethton's plans and what is planning. My name is Jon Hartman. I'm the Planning and Development Director for the City of Elizabethton. And just really kind of want to touch base. I don't want to take up too much time. I'd like to save a lot of time for questions. Giving you kind of a quick overview presentation of what the urban growth boundary is and what that means. Just to kind of get started, I want to hit a little bit on some of the history, just to kind of give you a background. Prior to 1998, annexation was done by cities through a approval by the legislature. So an act, special act by the legislature would have to be made in order to have a city annexed to a particular area. A lot of turf battles really started, and primarily around Nashville area, and we can be proud, in Upper East Tennessee. Johnson City, Kingsport really started going and making some really aggressive annexation plans, and really tried to start pushing annexation into different areas. Elizabethton also was drug into this with Johnson City's major annexations that they were making. Elizabethton also went ahead and annexed the right-of-way, or just the street, Milligan Highway, as well as, how many of you remember the Greenlee Road annexation? Are any of you familiar with that? The whole debate of keeping Johnson City away from Elizabethton. The Greenlee Road annexation was actually part of that buffer, part of a way in which we can keep Johnson City at a distance. The legislature finally got fed up with it, essentially, and said we need to come up with a new way of allowing for annexations. So in 1998, Public Chapter 1101 was enacted. Public Chapter 1101 did one major thing, which was a way to, they felt, to help prevent a lot of this turf grabbing, corridor annexation stuff that was really not good planning, nor was it appropriate for cities to do. Chapter 1101 creates the County Coordinating Committee. Basically what this committee does is it looks at the different growth areas in the county. Specifically, more pertaining to cities, is it looked at areas in which we could expect to see major substantial growth of this municipality or city within a 20-year time period. The County Coordinating Committee then would make a recommendation to the state, and the state would, of what the area needs to be of this planning region, of the urban growth boundary. And they would make a recommendation to the state, and the state would review it and adopt it. That's where the urban growth boundary comes into play. In Carter County, we saw full compliance to the urban growth plan and the urban growth boundary in Carter County in the year 2000. That's when our urban growth plan was adopted and our urban growth boundary was also adopted.
Question.
Yes?
Is there a possibility that this might be expanded or changed?
Yes. Chapter 1101 does make provisions that at any given time the County Coordinating Committee can be reconvened, and at that point the boundaries of a planned growth area or an urban growth area, growth boundary, to be expanded or to be moved. Now again, this has to, for that to happen, it's a very lengthy process, and that County Coordinating Committee has to come back into play. Reconvene, gather the necessary information and data, and then it will have to go back and be passed before the county legislature and the municipal legislature. So,
Do you know if there have been any thoughts along that line?
as far as the city is concerned, no. We are not anticipating any kind of, I'm not expecting anything in the next 20 years to look at us expanding that growth boundary. Any other questions before we move on? A few of the purposes that were, of course, cited by the state legislature as as a reason for creating the urban growth boundary was to eliminate the annexation out of fear, which was the whole turf battle issue of we're fearful that Johnson City is going to come over to Elizabethton and start annexing properties right up next to the city limits of Elizabethton, landlocking Elizabethton, and so we're going to go ahead and create this buffer area, if you will, with the Greenlee Road annexation and the Milligan Highway annexation in order to keep Johnson City away, which is not, by the way, not good planning practice to do those corridor annexations like that. So that was one of the elements for adopting urban growth boundaries. Another one that the legislation also stated as a reason for adopting Chapter 1101 was to stabilize each county's education funding base and establish incentives for each county legislative body to be more interested in educational matters. I thought this one was interesting. When I was reviewing for this, preparing for this presentation, I was not aware of that item as a purpose that the state legislature put out there. But I thought it was very interesting. It definitely applies to this committee. And just one of the last ones that they listed there was, in the legislation, was to minimize urban sprawl. And of course, that would help prevent, as we'll see in the next slide here, prevent some of that urban sprawl that we were seeing with that corridor annexation and gives the municipalities authority to control the boundaries around, just outside, the properties just outside the city limits. Does everybody have a map of this? I don't know if this is showing up very well here. The darker area right here is, of course, the city limits. These are all roads in the county. And this area that you see that with the dashed lines in it, that is what we call our urban planning region. The darker red line around the outside is the urban growth boundary. Elizabethton has typically called it our urban growth region, urban growth area. That's just something that we have adopted as kind of our own terminology. Statewide, it's recognized as the urban growth boundary. But we've adopted it just kind of as urban planning region. And it's anywhere between basically our city limits and the urban growth boundary. So all of these shaded areas is in Elizabethton's urban growth or urban planning region. Some of the authority that the city can do within that urban planning region is planning commission subdivision regulations. Anything, any properties, anytime you want to do a subdivision and let's say you live inside the planning region, you are required to come before the city planning commission to get approval to subdivide. And that's one way that communities can prevent sprawl, is by regulating the size of parcels and properties that are subdivided. So our subdivision regulations are, of course, much different than a county subdivision regulations in the sense that we require curb and guttering for our roads. We require different kinds of easements for stormwater and sewer. Another thing that we'll look at when we look at subdividing an area is compliance with what we call our long-term transportation plan. That basically looks at where we would like to see new roads within the city or around the city. And so any compliance, any subdivisions that you want to do, while you do live in the county and not in the city, you will have to come under city compliance when you're doing subdivisions. The other thing is city council annexation. There are two types of annexation that the Tennessee Code Annotated allows for. Annexation by referendum and annexation by ordinance. If a piece of property is in the planning region, the city of Elizabethton can, at any given time, annex that property by ordinance or by referendum. Of course, referendum would be the property owners will be coming to us, voting to be annexed. Annexation by ordinance is authority given to the city by the Tennessee Code Annotated for the simple fact that there are sometimes subdivisions outside the city or on the edge of the city that do need to be part of that are urbanized and are part of the city economically. Their street structures may fit in with the city street structures. They have full services. In that case, that annexation by ordinance allows the city to go ahead and go out and annex a certain subdivision or a particular area that is urbanized without requiring a referendum by the citizens that live in the county. So we could just go out, grab a section, and say, you're urbanized, you're now in the city. That's the authority that TCA does grant the city, grant city council to do. Now, and this kind of comes back to your question before about extending the urban growth boundary. TCA does have a provision that if part of a parcel is in the urban growth, within the urban growth boundary, and it's 10 acres or less that is outside the growth boundary, an annexation can be completed, but it has to be completed only by referendum. A city cannot go out and just grab a specific area by ordinance.
So if the citizenry of that area wanted annexation, wanted to be in the city,
Yes,
they could petition the city to annex them.
that's correct. That's correct. Even if it's outside of the urban boundary.
And how far was that out?
There's not a specific size. You can see on your maps that it varies from on the east side of the city. There's actually no urban growth boundary. so on the north and south, varying from roughly, a quarter of a mile to half mile. It depends on different areas, to a mile even on some areas.
You mentioned something like 10 acres or less or something, what did you say there?
Parcels, pieces of property that are 10 acres or less.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
10 acres.
Yeah, 10 acres or less, yeah. Pieces of property that are 10 acres or less. If part of them are in that planning region, by referendum, we can go in and take those. But it has to be by referendum only. A city cannot force annexation outside of that. So, the other thing that we're responsible for is the long-term planning consideration. Basically what that means is that when we prepare our long-term planning documents, and I might be getting a little technical here, but most cities, all cities are required, if they have a planning commission, to have what we call a comprehensive plan. And basically what that is it provides a list of, it includes land use. We have to prepare and plan for future land use, future transportation infrastructure, future facilities, public facilities, future parks. We also have to look at our schools and do a plan, prepare plans according to expected growth. So when we talk about long-term planning consideration, we look at our planning region as kind of part of the city, if you will. We do, when we are applying for long-term transportation planning, we include the planning region in with that plan. So when we're looking at the entire city, we're not just looking at the city, we're looking at the planning region as a whole. One other thing before we get to questions here is I do want to make you aware of, and I didn't include that on this map, and I wish I would have. Johnson City also has a planning region. I'm sure you all are aware of. Most cities do. And their planning region actually comes in here. It meets ours. Right in here, and their city limits are right down here. So their planning region actually from about here to about up here. Actually, we border Johnson City and their planning region that entire way. So, something you also need to maybe consider when you're looking at this is population areas that are in, right in here, and areas just south of here that are not annexed into the city of Johnson City, because that may be in their planning region also, and they have the same authority that we do, and at any time they can go ahead and annex by ordinance or by referendum into their planning region.
John, do you have ability to tie their planning region into Elizabethton City's planning region?
Yeah, yeah.
Would you do that for us so
Yeah,
we can have
sure.
that? Because we have to consider all that.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the Johnson Cities on my thumb drive here.
Yeah.
But it'd be real nice if I had a map like this showing the Johnson City urban growth boundaries and Elizabethton, so we could have them all tied together.
Yeah, and that's not a problem.
Because we're looking at municipality growth.
Yeah, I have access to a lot of their GIS information,
Okay.
and so I can pull up that
I appreciate that.
information and get their planning region out there. The other thing that maybe to consider here is the city of Watauga actually does not have a planning region. There's two types of planning systems that you can have. You can have a municipal planning commission, or you can have a regional planning commission. Elizabethton has a regional planning commission, and so does Johnson City, which basically gives us the authority to act outside of our municipal boundaries and into the planning region. Watauga does not have that. I believe they have a planning commission, but they just have a municipal planning commission. So they only can act within their city boundaries, unlike Elizabethton. So Watauga is not an area you're going to have to be concerned about. So, are there any questions?
Just as a point of clarification,
Mhm.
Johnson City's boundary could overlap into Elizabethton's current boundary?
No.
So it ends there?
That's correct, yes. Part of Chapter 1101, part of it was to get rid of this whole going out and grabbing as much land as you can. And so the way that they did that was they said, we're going to go ahead and, basically sit everybody down in a room and say, okay, figure this out. So Elizabethton said, well, we expect growth here, we expect to grow out, at least out to here. Johnson City said, well, we expect to grow at least out to here. So we just kind of drew the line there. There is no overlap here. So if Elizabethton does no annexation for the next 50 years, let's say, and Johnson City does annex, they have the authority that they can annex all the way to their urban growth, all the way to our urban growth boundary line. But they can't annex anymore. So this is, what you see here is really about as far as Johnson City or any other municipality can come as close to Elizabethton.
So in a way, kind of protects us.